Hey everybody, Stefan Spencer here. I'm here with Dr. Andrew Hill, and this is Peak Brain Institute. I have done about 20 sessions of neurofeedback, and we're going to review my results because we did the QEEG and focus and attention test to see how I've fared over these 20 or so sessions.
That's right. So we did two things: an attention test called a continuous performance task, which is a very boring test of your attention. I think you would agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very boring.
Yeah, really boring. Where you sit and click on mouse buttons when you see or hear certain stimuli, but it resists other stimuli. So since it's so unloaded, you make errors of inattention if you miss things, or impulsivity if you click on things. And we had some performance bottlenecks for you initially. And overall, your scores were very high in attention, but they're a little uneven, such that you were being very, very quick, but not quite as focused. And you're being very, very careful, except if you forgot to. So little moments of inattention or impulsivity, but sort of overall very high performance, but not very efficient. The performance has changed over the past couple of months, and you've basically gone up by about a standard deviation overall. The worst bottlenecks have changed by about 1.5 standard deviations. There's some consistency difficulty and some focus.
So just a second. So standard deviation, that means
Yes.
95% plus accuracy, that it was a real change.
Yeah, most people are, people are variable, and so the middle of the average for any particular age is the mean, or the middle of the bell curve. And a standard deviation is something like a third away from the mean, and there's about 3 standard deviations on a bell curve below the mean, and about 3 above the mean before you end up covering the whole population. So it's normal variability. And typical humans are variable about 1 standard deviation above and below the mean. So like, the mean of male height is like 5'9" or something in our country. A standard deviation is about 2 inches. So it's a little unusual to be 5'11", but not very unusual. It's a little unusual to be 5'7", not that unusual. But shorter than 5'7", above 5'11", that's really unusual statistically. For the attention test, 100 is the middle, and it's a 15-point standard deviation. So below 85 is a bottleneck, and above 115 is a benefit. And you had some scores that were dramatically above 115, like your speed and your stamina, locking in and trying hard. But then you had some dips in things like focus, which are staying on when things aren't changing, and consistency, which is that monitor and staying like good performant. You had some really interesting bottlenecks, essentially, where you were brute forcing with just lots of horsepower, performing okay, but later in the test you were browning out or getting automatic. And so there was like a sense that you weren't using your attention resources together in a smooth, effortless, efficient way. You were kind of like having to really try hard to do somewhat low-key, boring things, which would suggest that your executive function was a little bit suboptimal, essentially.
Okay, got it.
And now it looks great. We've mostly cleared up all the bottlenecks.
So let's have a look at
So
what you're...
These are 2 different attention tests. And I'm going to change the sides. Left side here, called attention, is Stefan, not missing things. So on this side, 110 means he was better than average for attention before, but he had some dips in his focus, meaning he was drifting when things weren't exciting. And now overall he's 118, so he's gone up by half a standard deviation, but the visual attention's gone up by a full 10 points, and the biggest change there is the focus has gone up from a 97 to a 114, so that's more than a standard deviation of change, a very large change against the population. And for some reason, he's also cranked his speed up even higher, which is pretty interesting. He still hasn't brought up the focus, so this becomes our target to go after for more training. That the focus for auditory information is still low, while for visual, it really did climb nicely. So we're getting some changes in some of the resources.
And because it's above that 1 standard deviation, this is real. This isn't just like a kind of an artifact or something.
Right. There's not much change on this test, administration to administration. There's almost no performance or practice effect on a CPT. This is boring, right? You're performing at your worst because it is so boring to continue to stay engaged. So people will do this test every few days and have completely stable scores. The change we're seeing here is a real change. And we also see the similar change in your brain. So then we really do believe it because you can't change your brain voluntarily. Yeah. This will change a little bit based on how tired you are, if you're trying hard.
And I was tired when we took that test.
But the brain maps are totally stable regardless of what you're doing with your mind. So
awesome.
And then the impulsivity side hasn't really changed overall. We have just below average. We're close to the mean here at a compound score. But what we are getting is the biggest bottlenecks before when there was called consistency. That was a 62%, really getting in the way. That's gone up by 20 points. And we have a little consistency there of 88 jumping to 110. So that's much better in terms of performance across the test. So you're able to sort of stay engaged and manage those resources much, much better. We're still seeing a little prudence dip here, the carefulness dip. And that would suggest you're a little fatigued and it's still hard to monitor, still a little impulsive at times. And so that's the trial scores. We also have sustained scores, which are meta, sort of like how you're managing those resources over time. Your sustained auditory went from a 112 to 119, and visual went from 102 to 122. So these are, half to more than one standard deviation change. So you're able to metacognitively sustain performance in a much better way now over 25 minutes. Before you were dipping throughout the test a little bit, which is normal. But now you're a good solid 1.5 standard deviations above average for maintaining performance over time, which gives you a performance benefit now that was not present a couple months ago against people your age. You're now performing better than you were on a raw level, which is great.
Now these are kind of unusual results.
A little faster change, yeah. We've only done 18 sessions of training before the second map, and I usually map every 20 sessions or so, and often get around 2/3 of a standard deviation broadly. I sort of say about 25 sessions is pretty classic for one standard deviation, and you've done 18 sessions and you're getting more like 1 to 1.5. So you seem to be moving a little faster, and we spoke off air about it, but my hunch is that we stretched your sessions out a little bit in time. You kind of stopped and started here and there.
Right,
and we
probably got travel.
Into a lot of travel, and we got a little bit of like inconsistent movement. Instead of moving linearly and catching a point in time and not knowing where you would change, I've kind of caught a little more calendar time. So I think we're seeing sort of the effect of not just the acute training, but a little bit of the sort of longer term changes that creep in sometimes for people. So essentially you're changing a little faster, which is great, but some people also do. I often get really rapid change for some people and a little bit slower change for others. You might just be a little bit faster changer. But it's nice to see. Looking at your brain maps, we see very similar change.
Okay, let's have a look.
And I pulled up the most valid page in the data. This is a ratio page. And this is the first map, and this is the second map. What we're looking at here is the theta-beta ratios. These are the most valid markers for things like executive function, this theta over beta ratio. And this little pulse noise, that's some noise in the data, or artifact we call it, because there's a pulse next to his ear. But the big excess of theta-beta, this would suggest impulsivity and maybe rumination or anxiety for some people. And it's really dropped by at least a standard deviation in the back of the head, which would suggest you're feeling less impulsive, less ruminative in general, a little bit at least. We see a decrease in impulsivity on some of our attention performance is better on the attention test. This tracks. But then my hypothesis would be you're also feeling a little bit less clenched or stuck in stress response. I think it's still there and can still ramp up.
Yeah.
But my hunch is that you have a little more ready ability to downshift when you get a little bit ramped up. It's a little bit easier to find that balance point. Is that true?
Yeah, so I would say I'm less ruminative, and I feel more focus available and more kind of calm and centeredness.
Okay, great. So that tracks what I would guess. We're still seeing a little bit of impulsivity and a little bit of rumination in the data, but again, gone down in a way that matches the attention test change. It's about 1 to 1.5 standard deviations. So again, about maybe twice as much change as I would expect at this chunk of training.
Okay.
We're still seeing lack of deep sleep. The one thing that hasn't moved for you enough in the data is you're making all these extra slow brain waves in delta and alpha, suggesting you're kind of burnt out, not getting enough rest from sleep. And so I often get that to change first, but for you it's been the executive function and stress switching system that's changed faster, and we just haven't gotten your deep sleep to shift as much. That might be a function of travel or a bunch of other things, or maybe we haven't dialed it in for you. It's probably the latter. We haven't actually leaned on the thing you need yet for sleep, which happens sometimes.
You know, I was just at Genius Network recently, and I was talking with Dr. Sachin Patel there. He was saying that something that made a big difference for him had nothing to do with like brainwaves or whatever. It was a grounding mat. So he sleeps on a grounding mat or sheet that plugs into the wall, to the grounding outlet, and nights that he didn't sleep on it, his deep sleep was not as good as
Interesting.
nights that he
I've heard
slept
people
on.
say that. I'm not sure how I feel about earthing or grounding. I'm not sure. I think it might be that category of things like quantum and,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm even a little bit skeptical about EMF, and I'm the biohacking world that's, verboten is to not believe that you're being poisoned by EMF. I'm of mixed minds about that. I work with electricity. It's really hard to measure electricity from inside the body. It's so fragile to get. And even emitters in the environment, like I've done EEGs having somebody sitting next to a electrically noisy compressor of a air conditioner, and you get a sense very quickly of how much this stuff is bleeding into signals. When the way physics works, when you move double the distance away from the emitter of an electromagnetic source, you drop the power by a cube, which means that things just tail off when you get very far away from a source. I mean, even like TMS and TDCS, there have been some studies last year showing that doing it to a corpse, most electricity goes around the head, not into the head. It's really hard to get signals into the body. So I'm of the opinion that most of that, if it's working, it's probably doing something we don't understand. And it's a bit of a blind man and elephant situation where we all think we have a bit of truth and we're all kind of just finding bits of information.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then there's somebody else who's big into biohacking. He spent 6 figures on trying to hack his deep sleep. This guy named Alex Becker, and he posted to Facebook that the 2 things that made a huge difference for him, one was the red light therapy. I think it was the Juve that he was using, and the other was hyperbaric oxygen.
Hyperbaric oxygen makes a lot of sense because sleep and oxygen are related, and HBOT will cause some changes. If you have some like inflammation, HBOT will drop the inflammation, deeper sleep, better oxygen metabolism perhaps. I think about sleep and circadian entrainment with regards to things like all the zeitgeibers, all the time givers, all the entrainment cues. And the strongest entrainment cue is actually not light, which most biohackers will go after. Light is the big one. It's when you eat. Is by far the strongest circadian entrainer. So you shouldn't eat in the evening, essentially. If you're an average human, that'll suppress your re-entrainment. It'll suppress growth hormone release at the beginning of the night, which means you don't sleep very deeply. So it's important to fast for 3 to 4 hours before bed for most people.
Okay, so that's a bad habit for me. I've
That's
been
probably
eating
contributing.
sometimes at 10 o'clock at night.
I want you to do 3 hours minimum of only water and herbal tea between dinner and bed. And 4 would be even better, and 5 would be even better. But like 3, try 3 for a week or 2, and I have a hunch it will turn the corner a little bit on your deep sleep, just that alone. Because that is some people are very sensitive to having their growth hormone suppressed by having a little insulin when they fall asleep. And 75% of your growth hormone should be released when you fall asleep, and that at the end of the first sleep cycle, when the next REM kicks in, about 90 minutes in, that should be the 75% huge surge of growth hormone, unless you're going to sleep with insulin a little bit high, and then you get suppression of that, which means you don't ever go down into deep sleep, and then late in the night, early in the morning, you don't get the ghrelin cortisol surge to wake you up and feel calm and crisp. So I've been telling people recently, go to bed a little bit hungry and tired, you wake up refreshed and full. Go to bed full, you'll wake up hungry and tired.
Gotcha. What about taking naps during the day? Are you in favor of that or against it?
I think people are variable. I think some people can do it well, others can't. I think if you're going to do a nap during the day, you're probably better keeping it to the point where you're not really getting even into stage 3 sleep. Like a 20-minute nap is probably ideal. Because otherwise you're going to start doing sleep stages and,
Yeah, if I take a nap, I'm usually down for a good hour, an hour and a half.
That's a full cycle of sleep. Yeah, you kind of have to then plan for 90 minutes and then plan for some,
and that'll mess my night up for how much deep sleep I get later
potentially.
on.
So I'd almost rather you meditate for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or exercise or go for a walk.
Or a short nap.
Or a short nap. Yeah, like I'm resting my eyes for 10 minutes kind of nap.
Yeah, okay.
And that's almost more of a meditative, because the first part of sleep, if you're tired, the first stage of sleep is stage 1, where you're not really asleep and you think you're awake and you're kind of somewhat aware consciously. If I woke you up and then said, well, you were asleep, you'd say, no, I wasn't sleeping, I was thinking. So you kind of want to be in stage 1 sleep. You should do a nap almost like you didn't know you fell asleep. If you're really getting into sleep in a nap, you're getting into stages, then you need at least 90 minutes, I would say. And then you can throw off the circadian treatment later on that night. So my advice is, if you're tired, do some breath work, do some exercise, go for a walk, have a cup of coffee, do other things to shift your energy. Doing some deep breathing, will produce some energy boost. Doing some hydration will change your energy for some people. So I would shift your state, shift your environment, shift your body instead of taking a nap for most people.
Okay. Cool. Anything else about my brain maps that we want to?
No, just in general, we see some nice improvement in executive function markers, a reduction in the rumination markers, and we don't see much change in the deep sleep markers. Really dramatic change in the most valid marker, the theta-beta ratio, which is the brain mapping is more of a hypothesis generator, but the theta-beta ratio is considered diagnostically valid for executive function issues, and that's really dropped away nicely, more than I would have expected. This is like what happens with 30 sessions of neurofeedback usually. A really nice change to sort of impulsivity and being a little bit hard to inhibit when things, and for you that's a bit of a rumination, things pounce on you, I would expect. And so it's like a disinhibited stress response, not just an overdriven stress response for you.
Now, one thing you'd mentioned before we started recording is talked a little bit about ADHD and how that's probably not an accurate label for me,
Right.
and it's probably not a label that serves really anybody. Like to get a diagnosis with ADHD, like what do you do with that? So
Yeah, I mean, it's probably useful if you're a kid or a student who needs more accommodation or time or a quiet room or something, then it might be useful.
yeah,
But I don't think it's useful because from my perspective, it's truly ADHD, then I just get rid of it with neurofeedback. I mean, 20, 30, 40 sessions of neurofeedback eliminate ADHD for almost everyone permanently. So if it's truly an impulsivity, an attention problem, then I just want to get rid of it. And otherwise, you know, it's a bit heterogeneous. It's a bucket that you throw kids into, and they have different things. And for some kids, it's driven by anxiety. Other kids, it's sleep issues. Other kids have old brain trauma. Other kids have PTSD. It can all look like dysregulated executive function.
so it's kind of symptomatic. It's not.
Well, at least the way that I work, I'm always dropping one level below the diagnostic label to figure out, well, which resource are you talking about? So I'm not here to reinforce the label for you, or even to care which label you come in with. It's to say, well, here's your brain. What do you want to do with it? Where's the pinch? And we talked initially a couple months ago about these theta beta things, and I thought, okay, they're a little disinhibited, therefore you probably are a little impulsive, which we saw in the attention test, not dramatically. And because it's in this sort of social and sensory area, my thought was some of the rumination was this flavor that like a little disinhibited, things pounce on you, get a little stuck. And so my thought was, okay, the switching system that evaluates the environment gets a little bit hyper-focused, and that might get in your way. What do you think? And you were like, that sounds like plausible. I like that. That sounds like a real thing, and it gets in the way. Let's work on that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm at for you is what do you want to work on, not here's what's wrong.
Yeah. Now, when I went to Amen clinics and they did not only the QEEG but the SPECT scan, they found a diamond pattern thing going where I was getting stuck in loops, and they recommended taking some GABA calm supplements to help calm that down.
Yeah, that's going to be the same things we're seeing, these cingulate markers, which are disinhibited, the brakes were not on. And we've been able to give you the ability to brake, to inhibit those things a lot better, it looks like. We could then train down the accelerators a little further, which we haven't done yet for you. We haven't taken the edge off. We've only been giving you more self-control. Nothing we've done has given you, has like put you in neutral or taken things down. Everything we've done for you has actually been boosting, which is interesting. You're getting less anxiety, if you will, less rumination through boosting resources. I'm not taking things down, they're stuck yet. Now we can do a little bit of that if you want. But everything we've been doing is about like just giving you more control, more like tone on those systems.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned was that the neurofeedback training has been around kind of general overall.
Yeah, SMR beta clusters across the motor strip, which will give you more inhibitory tone on the right, more vigilance and alertness and deep sleep on the left. That's why I was sticking there for you for a long time, the left, because that often slams your deep sleep into gorgeous, gorgeous shape. But it didn't do that for you. And so we had to hunt around and do other things. And we got some nice executive function change and drop in the sort of theta in the back of the head by training the middle of the head. You often want to train the motor strip to make changes in the front or the back because it's sort of it's going after the deeper circuits that connect the thalamus and the cortex instead of going after the modules. You can change a module, but it has to be integrated and used by the rest of the brain. And a lot of that happens in the middle of the head instead of individual modules. So I always start broadly and then see what changes and then get more experimental and theoretical and use different models as we go. We got great results with you having never gone after some of the most egregious markers in the maps. I mean, I'm not training off the maps. I use the maps to inform my models of how you work, but the goal isn't to train you to a green head or to train on the hot spots in the map. You know, it happens. You know, this went more green. It's nice. I'm glad it did that. My expectation is you're less ruminative, a little bit less impulsive, but I'm not training off the data, I'm training off my understanding of how your brain works. Roberto Pasquale Marquis, who invented Loretta, which is a source analysis, will disparagingly call neurofeedback people who believe in the data patterns too much. He calls this doing hotspotology, where you sort of like, it's almost like a neo-phrenology. Oh, this must mean that, therefore let's train it down. But that's the trap of neurofeedback, is to believe the data too much. The map is not the territory, the brain map is not the brain. You have to just kind of be informed by it a little bit that way.
Yeah. Now, what's normal or ideal for deep sleep for somebody of my age? I'm 48.
Yeah, well, the range is sort of half an hour to an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. When people get on half an hour, they don't perform well. Usually on an hour to an hour and a half, people start feeling fine. Above an hour and a half, they're usually great as adults. Kids need more like 2.5 hours, 2 hours to feel good. But adults, around an hour and a half and above, they usually report feeling pretty darn good, and the performance shows up pretty well on their attention tests, and they don't show any sleep dysregulation in the sort of brain signatures usually once they're about an hour and a half. But the literature, I think, says you want more like 2 hours. But from performance, in terms of measuring your sleep, everyone, I think, is getting good results in about an hour and a half.
Yeah, so I've been getting like 48 minutes on a good night, even maybe an hour and 10 minutes if it's a really good night.
Great.
But I've been sick for like 2.5 weeks, and I've been getting sleep scores in the 50s and with the Oura Ring. And I know you've got some issues with, Oura Rings are not always
just measurement
accurate.
in general. I mean, you shouldn't believe a measurement. You should just inform. I mean, I kind of view sleep trackers, well, they do have some accurate data. There's also some issues with them. And so I view them like body fat scales, where the absolute number isn't necessarily all that valid, but the change is. So if your tracker is saying you had half an hour of deep sleep every night, maybe you don't believe that number. But if it goes up by 10 minutes, well, that change is probably a valid change.
Yeah, so I've been getting half my normal amount of deep sleep a night for the last 2.5 weeks, and it's killing me.
Yeah.
It's just, it's knocking me for a loop. Yeah.
So we're going to do a session today, see if we can't shift that for you. You haven't trained you in a couple of weeks, so we're going to do a session today and try to hit you hard and get you sleeping like a baby tonight.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.